Episode 4 of Session Stories on Session Solos. And I have to thank this guy. Session Solos doesn't really exist without Michael Nielsen for a couple reasons. Number one, I decide, there's not a channel that's just dedicated to all of these guitar players that really influence my playing. And so I was like, maybe I should do one on, just kind of the great session, guitarists and other ones that have influenced me. And I happened upon a Michael Nielsen video about the Morin amp. Now, most people are like, oh, what the hell are you talking about? I'll tell you. As a Mark Diglio XYZ fan, I was trying to capture stuff off the Hungry album. And so I started searching, as we're all stuck inside. And it was, I think, in October of 2020, maybe when you released that video. But anyway, we're getting towards the end of 2020. And I looked this up, and this guy's got his hands on one. And I'm going, well, who's Michael Nielsen, and why? How does he have a Morin amp? And then I went down the rabbit hole. And the second reason, I have a billion people ask me, well, how did you get the tone to capture that solo? And that was the Lukather early 80s sound. And then how did you get the Dan Huff off the thing? This guy before you, I have downloaded every rig he's put up for THU-Overloud. Oh, and
yeah.
Right there, that guy, that's how I got the tone, along with the wonderful folks at Fractal. So I am so honored to have you on this. Again, this is one of those, this has been a passion project of mine. I don't get paid a dime for anything I do on Session Solos. Music has given me so much. My entire thing was like, how do I give back so that when I'm dust, is there anything I've put forth in the world? So I tab up and do the guitar profiles of all these songs and riffs and solos, and I try to match the tone, and I try to do stuff on... Basically, as I say it to the younger kids, it's like we didn't have the internet, so I had to go to the music store and ask the guy, hey, how do you do that one thing with the compressed, deal down and you make the harmonic and it squeals? And they're like, all right, kid, I'll show you type thing. And so I was like, well, how do I kind of put some of that back out there? So part of it became this deal was someone said, why don't you start doing some interviews? And from the very first one I did with John McCurry, who was one of my guitar heroes and not probably heralded enough, everyone goes, you got to get Michael Nielsen on. You got to get Michael Nielsen on. I'm like, I know. Oh, nice. I'm the biggest Michael Nielsen fan in the world. I just need to find out how to get a hold of him. So I just wanted to thank you, Mr. Nielsen, for being on episode 4 of this. How are you?
Thank you. And also thank to Rich Rankin for putting us together, too. That was a great interview. I enjoyed that.
I'm a huge James Tyler fan. Like I told Rich, I don't have one. I know you've got a few. I do want to get to your, because not only does Michael Nielsen...
Did you build? You mentioned you build guitar. Did you build the guitar that you play in most of the videos? That's sort
almost
of looks
every
like
one
a
of them.
Tyler.
Well, like here's one. So yeah, this was one I built, and then
that's awesome.
Yeah, so it's been the story's funny. I won't bore you with it too much, but my uncle, huge influence on my life, had an early '80s made in Japan Squier Telecaster, which I didn't know those were such a big collector's item. Of course, during the pandemic, everything becomes a collector's item, but. So I started reading about the certain factory that was making Squiers in the early 80s. Of course, Fender was, in a little bit of disarray. And anyway, he had passed away, and I was sitting there with his guitar, and he had a broken nut slot on it. And I was looking for somebody to repair it, and I thought, I used to do this for my friends. I was the one guy that could set up a Floyd and, kind of see through some of these issues when I was in bands and stuff. And I thought, well, I'll just try to fix it. And I had to go somewhere, and I had somebody at a shop fix it, and it just wasn't right. And so I put it back together, and I put a new neck on it, and then I was like, well, I'll do this. And then I fixed one for a friend, and they're like, why don't you build one of these? I'm like, okay. Long story short, I'm building guitars. I don't know if this is ever going to go anywhere, but 40 or 50 instruments later,
whoa,
it's been a lot of fun. And that spawned this. So, yeah, that's how Session Solos came to be.
And the other thing is, I came across Session Solos before I knew of your channel, because sometimes you're just like, I'm sitting on the couch, I'm like, has someone else figured out this Landau solo so I don't have to? Can I just look at the numbers? Like, I'm tired. So I've already stolen some of your work, or
I love that. That's what I want. That the thing that makes me smile the most is, I started this with Rich, and so I want to start the same question with you. So I'm 40, and when I was 4, I started playing the piano, and when I was 6 or 7, I picked up the guitar. So we're talking about mid 80s all the way to, early 90s. I was so influenced by this music, or it's the most unique influence on guitar players, because a lot of us growing up, or a lot of people that are maybe younger than me, it's like, well, I like the guitarist in this band. And when you think of session guitarists, it's like I'd be listening to the radio and it was a pop song, not of a prototypical rock band in it, but it was, God, it had a killer solo. And then it just became this journey for me of figuring that out. So for me, I wanted to start there, is that I find it so interesting as you're digging around on YouTube. There are people from all over the world that are fascinated by this era of music, and not even just the session guitars, kind of the 80s hard rock, melodic rock, fusion influence, whatever you want to call it. I'm kind of blown away. I guess I'm kind of blown away that it almost took 40 years for it to come back versus the kind of that 20. What do you see on your side? Are you fascinated by because the engagement you get when you do stuff? I'm like, I know that this music is popular because I see, there's the reaction that you get when you cover Dan Huff's rack sounds. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, I think like you and I, obviously, like we go deep. Like I saw on the Session Solos site, you had Wilson Phillips, You're in Love.
Yep.
Which is actually like one of my favorite guitar performances.
Me too.
On any pop song.
Yep.
And it's almost like an mbop thing almost, where you go like, it's a perfect pop song, and Landau plays, he's got the awesomest strat tone going.
Yes.
And he plays the tastiest stuff you could possibly imagine. And especially at the time, that was sort of like a transition. Sorry, this is a little...
No, we got time. Let's rock, yes.
At that time, that was a transition out of the slickest of 80s, late 80s, and into the more raw, like Alanis Morissette sort of thing, which Landau was also on one of the songs on Morissette. But then it's like there's like a roto vibe and stuff. You could hear like, oh, he didn't bring the rack that day. He brought the 90s Landau showed up for that one.
Yes.
But it's like a perfect transition where if you had given that session gig to a different guy, they would have totally done the 5 years earlier Lukather, Landau, Dan Huff screaming solo that like they did on Chicago songs.
Yes.
That's also amazing.
Yes.
But you would go like, it took that song, it didn't push it forward at all. But Landau, like, it's so tasty what he played on there.
It's funny
So
about
when
that
you had
one.
that on there, I was like, this is my guy.
Well, it's funny is Glenn Ballard, who was, wrote that song with them, was one of the guys, because I try to tag people in it, not so they will comment, but more just like, my biggest issue is the fact that there isn't enough proper credit, and a lot of times I told somebody this the other day, Glenn Medeiros did 2 songs on the Karate Kid 3 soundtrack. I did more research trying to figure out who played the solo on that song than I did my entire 4 years in college on anything. And to the point where I finally got a hold of Glenn himself, and I said, hey, I can't get Humberto Gatica to tell me because I can't, he won't respond. So do you know? And he said, well, Landau did stuff, but we never released it. I'm pretty sure it was Dan Huff. So I went with it, to the point where I'll still get comments and go, I had somebody who was kind of a big fan of Toto and that era and stuff. Like, Humberto Gatica never worked with Dan Huff. And I'm like, I'm just going off what the guy who sang the song said. If you know better, tell me. I promise I want to make this right. But when Glenn Ballard reached out, it was so interesting because he remembered everything he was messaging me. He's like, oh, when I hear Michael play, it makes me smile. I remember writing that song and that, with them in this studio, and he played. And I'm like, to me, it's just cool because I'm talking to people that are 10, 20 years older than me going, did you know that, this person played on this album, this place? And it's just still, I've heard Luke talk about it. They don't get enough credit for the fact that they also were writing so much of the music because they didn't have, it was so bare bones, when they would go in the studio.
When, and I will circle back around to your first question, but when I was in my 20s, I was lucky enough to be friends and work with an amazing producer named Stephen Bray. Stephen Bray, like there was an era that was like they called it Bradio because he had so many like songs on the radio. And his most famous stuff would be Madonna, like the True Blue and that era, album before and after kind of stuff. So he was one of the really like 3 producers, I think, that were responsible for that Madonna like skyrocket.
Sure.
So we were in this building that was like 8 studio pods or maybe 10 studio pods. And he was in there. There's another amazing producer and engineer named Tony Shepard. There's Tom Harriman, who's written this humongous sort of like Broadway kind of hit. I mean, it was just like every room had these guys from the generation before me. And one of them, actually in several of them, they were like writers. And it was writers where you go into their studio room and it's a piano. That was it. And then they would go like, here's the song. And I was I didn't start as a writer. I started as a producer, sort of arranger, but really more producer, engineer. So they would bring up the song. And they're like, here's the song. Go. And the mentality also was like, the words are 50% and then the chords are 50%. Anything else is nothing. So if you're like, cool, I took it. Look, I completely flipped it on its head. It's a unique arrangement with the drum beat, and I changed some stuff. They're like, sweet, handshake. I appreciate that. And that's just of that era, that they came through of that 80s, 70s, and 80s, sort of classic copyright breakdown of stuff. Now, that's why you see 8 writers on a pop song, because if you contribute a snare sample, you're like, cool. I need my 5% of that or whatever.
My daughter showed me some song. I can't remember what it was. And she was like, oh, did you see this? And I'm the person that has been reading liner notes since I was going through my mom's vinyl. But it was like, yeah, I wonder who wrote that. And there was like 12 people. And I go, wow, it's different. It's different now.
Yeah.
It's a different era. But do you...
For sure.
So to that question, because Rich brought it up, I have had people that I know in Nashville bring it up, like that are, involved in the music industry, that have worked in, country and everything else, that the more, I always say with music, I feel like I should talk to people like you versus what I hear here in Omaha or anything else, especially nowadays, like radio is so, homogenized and saturated and it's the same 12. But I always feel like something's usually bubbling up way out there and it's kind of on delay, it gets to you. But what I hear with the people that are in the studios is they're like Rich said, but that one person said, yeah, I hit the series parallel button. It's like, do you know how many plugins I was trying to use to get that one sound? You hit a button and there it is. So they are looking for it. What do you see from your perspective? And do you find it as fascinating as I do? Because I think it's
that's
wild.
kind of circles around to that first question is like, I think that the way technology just went crazy through the 80s.
Yeah,
it was massive. You could hear it, and especially as in my late 40s, how fast 5 years goes, 10 years goes. Like you just go like, oh, that was just moments ago. I feel like I'm the same person 10 years ago.
Yep.
But if you go to 1980 music or 1979, and then go to 1989 music, it's like a century's worth.
It is
of evolution, of how it's like 3-dimensional and swirly, and it's bonkers. The separation and like listen to Toto 4, which won a Grammy and is like heralded as one of the best sounding albums ever. Legendary engineers, of course, legendary everything, and then go to like just a few years later to Toto 7. Which is like George Massenburg, also legendary guys. But so it's like it's an equal playing field. But the spectrum is just so different.
Yeah.
Like the technology went so bonkers. So I think it was also the last era of where music was written on such a high level.
Yes.
It was before phones, and like MTV hadn't quite ruined everything yet. Reality TV hadn't ruined everything. So you're getting out of the 70s the people that know how to write. And then you get this mix of writing and technology and talent. I don't think we'll ever see that again. I mean, it's crazy today because you'll see a 13-year-old that could play every chord. Oh. Like, where's that coming from?
I know.
It's just, it's a different place when you've, like, it's like you have a dish and that dish sat overnight, or you're doing ribs and you let them like soak in. If you let that soak in over time versus like just flash it, poof, and you're like, it's different. I feel that way with music. Like if you absorb that stuff over your lifetime, it's going to be a little different. Whatever. That's an old man talk, but
no. We can talk old man as long as you want.
Oh, yeah. Close. Yeah, we're close enough. So, 90s hit, and then it got stripped down, and which I love as well. But you're like, cool, we'll do the 1, 3, 5, 6 of the minor, and like I'll listen to that all day long. It's my favorite, like 3 notes to like riff on in drop D.
Sure,
good to go.
Sure.
But you weren't getting that, outside of maybe like Chris Cornell writing these amazing, like interesting chords and stuff.
Hauntingly
like that.
Cool.
Yeah, but not that much. And then I feel like it died for like 20 years from like the 2000 to more recently. And then now, I think because of just where the kids grew up and stuff, like you hear it coming back. Like if you listen to like the 1975 or Harry Styles or like it's so 80s influenced, and it's really nice, and the writing is great, and the production is great, and it's like strong musicianship, like as good as it ever was.
I thought Rich brought up a good point, and I hear this just on stuff that I hear younger folks that I know just locally that play music, is that when you do have loops, like in the 80s with Fairlights and everything was that, you had a lot going on. How do I fit a guitar right there? Well, a twin cranked is going to get just absolutely dominated. It's going to be this muddy thing against the wall. And he's like, you're trying to figure out. And so I think that's why the kids were so fascinated when he hit the series parallel button, because it's like that cuts through. That cuts through all this other stuff. I get more emails, messages from people under the age of 30 that say, I didn't even know this music existed. I am hooked. And it's almost like the oversaturation of all the choices, whether you're talking about streaming or music. I don't think people, know to even dig into this. And then they heard it, and then it's kind of like wildfire. And you have your channel, and I see the younger folks like RJ and Leon Todd, and it is like it's a thing, and it's very, very cool. And I'm just trying to put some stuff out there that I think if you want to look at numbers and you don't feel like learning it, you can just pull it up. And that was
it's helpful anyway, because I was really lazy guitar wise growing up. So like my dad would always say, like, are you ever gonna, like, why don't you play a song? I was like, song? How about a riff?
My parents said that to me too. Yes.
I was like, Dad, I know the riff. That's it. Why would I need to learn the B section, the bridge?
Yeah, no.
I don't, like, I'm not out there playing with people.
No, why would I need to do that? Yeah.
So I know bits of a lot of stuff. But I don't know the full song. I never played through full songs until I was like playing in bands. Yep. And even in the studio, like when I was producing, it'd be like, here's 4 bars here. And especially in that era, it's like the singers would sing like, here's 1 bar, here's the next bar. Everything was just punched and punched and punched.
Sure.
So that's why I started my channel. 'Cause I was like, I literally was thinking, I need to be able to play a full song of something. So like, let me learn, like write my own stuff, and like, let me practice something so I could play it beginning to end, that challenge. Cause even solos will be like, yeah, I know the first third of it, and then it got hard, and I just stopped. I know that when I talked to like Robert Baker, who's such a lovely guy. He's. It's funny because when you talk to like a younger guy, generationally younger.
Yep.
And he's so inspired in the same way. I always look crooked, like, how are you that passionately in love with Europe, the band? And like, but it hits home in the same way. But he would always say, when he got to a part that he didn't know, he would just do his own version, improvise. And I was never into that. I was like, if I can't play this Nuno solo, like, I can't play it.
You and I are so the same way, because I was like, I'll improvise on it, but I have to know how they played it. And once I know it, then I can improvise. But I'm not doing anything until, it was almost like an OCD thing. It drove me insane. It made my skin
Close enough was not good enough.
No.
Like, in White Lion Wait, the solo, one of the most amazing.
Notice I haven't done that one yet. And don't worry, I've thought about it.
So hard. I mean, all of Vito's solos are hard. There's fast and then there's quick.
Yep.
Like, Yngwie is fast.
Yep.
But it's like a train. Once a train gets going, you can get there. There's quick, like if you listen to Little Fighter, like he's all over the neck. And it doesn't sound like, I don't think it's punched in. I think he's just like, I could work down here and I could work up here and I could work over here.
Yep.
It's really hard to get around like that. So back to White Lion Wait, there's a moment about halfway through the solo, which apparently was a one take. They were cutting the drums and the rhythm track. So, they'll cut the drums and the bass. The guitar player will play along, singer will sing along. They'll throw away the vocal track, throw away the guitar track. And then maybe re-punch in the bass, but you're really just trying to get the drums. So that's what they were playing. They were going through it. And Michael Wagner, amazing producer who mixed like Master of Puppets. He produced Pornography, the White Lion stuff, Skid Row.
Yeah.
Mega of that 87, 88 era, a hard rock producer. You don't have, like, you're trying to isolate the drums. So you don't want to have 4 raging stacks going.
Sure.
It's going to bleed. Even if it's in a block down the street, you're going to hear it in the compressed drum mics and stuff.
Yeah.
So he was running through a Groove Tubes amp that was going direct. So there was no speaker. So all of the rough track, it's like running through a pod or something like that. So he was doing that. That guitar solo, there's no speaker. That's what the guitar solo was. It's a direct Groove Tube amp, and it's amazing tone.
It is amazing.
In the middle of that solo, there's a harmonic that shows up.
Oh, yeah.
It's like in the middle of tapping.
Yeah.
So I've heard him do it live, and he hits the harmonic, and I've heard another guy on the internet do it, and as he goes through the tapping, it's like, bing! I've done it once in isolation of like, it is humanly possible, but it is impossible to actually do as you're in the middle of the solo, because it's like doing a trick basketball shot where you bounce it and bank it and bank it and bank. You need to do it 50 times and then you might get lucky. So I don't know if that was intentional or if everyone was like in the studio throwing their hands up like, what just happened? Miracle harmonic. Like, now that we have the technology to like slow things down infinitely and they're still in key, like you could actually figure, and then you isolate, you're like, I'm going to remove the drums, the bass, slow it down, like, now
so
you
that,
can hear
I was
what's
going to
happening.
say, that has been the biggest, using things like Rip and Mix for me has been so nice, because when I was a kid and you would wear the cassette out, you're still hearing like I get so frustrated because like a bass line, and in the 80s you had so much synth and strings and everything else sitting right in that frequency that it's like, I can't pick it out. It's so nice to be able to,
my
slow
stereo
it down
system when I was 12 years old was terrible. In fact, I mean, it was great as a 12-year-old because I inherited it. It was passed down. My dad had gotten a new setup, and he had awesome like Marantz stuff, like which is still like great to this day.
Yes.
So I had he gave me his record player that came with speakers. It's all sort of in one thing, and the speakers come out. But I mean, they have no bass.
Yeah.
And my life listening to music in my car and stuff up until, I don't know, I was 20 or something like that, really had no bass. And I still have to fight that to this day because that's how I hear music.
Yeah.
So like I don't usually it took me ages to go, oh yeah, I guess I should put a bass on this, because it just didn't matter because I barely hear the bass anyway. It was like guitars, there's something down here maybe because I can't hear it.
Yeah.
And then vocals, cymbals, and the kick and the snare.
Well, are you
bass.
like me? Do you feel like an old man? It's like, gosh, turn the bass down. I just need let's have a well-rounded sound here, because everything is very...
I mean, nowadays I do. Although there's sometimes that I listen to something that sounds definitively new, like the latest Periphery or something like that. That sounds very new to me, and I just absolutely love it.
Yep.
But honestly, when I listen to most of my heroes albums from the 80s and 90s that put out an album today, I don't like I feel like they're chasing today's sound that it doesn't work to me. Like, just it's a bummer.
Yeah, it is. I was trying to think. There was somebody, Spotify notified me that like some Heaven's Edge or somebody released an album, and I listened to it and I go, well, this isn't Heaven's Edge. I don't know what you guys are trying to do here, but yeah.
Well,
okay.
And that happened in the 90s too. Like the
Rat did it.
Yes. Warrant, where you're like, oh, I liked the slick Warrant, and then all of a sudden you're trying to be Pantera. Like, this doesn't work at all.
No. Yeah. I ride with the horse you came in on, but that's just me. I'm old. Okay, two-parter. I want to start here. Tell me about your background. We started there with the kind of your dad's vinyl collection, but your journey into music and the music, this kind of music, like just how did it begin? And then also the second part of that question is, I'd love to hear that decision in that moment. You're like, I'm starting a YouTube channel. Here we go. Like those two, I feel like they kind of run parallel once you get to a certain point, but I just like to hear the beginnings and how it all came to be.
Sure. I was, it was like my dad could play 2 songs with his thumb on guitar. Yep. And then I was just fascinated. So there was always an acoustic guitar around, and it happened to be a 000-18 Martin from like the 40s. It's a small Martin mahogany that's worth like $5,000 or something like that. He traded a BB gun for it at some point. Had no idea that it's worth, bazillions. And now it's priceless for me. It's still in his room next to him, but he doesn't know how to play it. But so when I would pick up the guitar, I had this amazing Martin. Had no idea either.
That's awesome.
So it was like 7th grade. OU-812 had sort of just come out. My dad had showed me Crossroads, the movie, which blew my mind.
Yes.
This new kid from Buffalo had just showed up in town, and he's like, check out this, and he plays Whitesnake 87 album that blew my mind.
Yes.
And his dad was a musician. So in their living room, they had this small studio setup, and he had a Rockman, the original X100, X whatever.
Oh, yeah.
The Rockman headphone amp.
Yeah.
Plugged into his mixer because he would do demos and he did commercials and stuff. And I remember sitting in his living room and he pulls out this 3-burst Strat, plugs it in, and I hadn't ever had an electric guitar. I had dreams of electric guitars because we'd walk through like the store called Gemco and they'd have them hanging up high, but I didn't know what they felt like because they're so high. And I remember having dreams of that. And when he's like, here, and I just could barely play one chord, and the distortion and the electric and the chorus and the reverb, it was just like, oh my God.
Yes.
I mean, there's that moment is like locked in, but like every color just flipped on at once. And then he played. I gave it back to him, and he bent a note, and I was like, "Whoa, what are you doing? You're gonna break it!" And he never answered me, and I kept going like, "Are you allowed to do that?"
Yeah, it's illegal, man.
Yeah, you can't break the strings.
Oh.
So we were great buddies for ages, and his dad was a gear junkie too, and every 3 months would be like, "Where'd that guitar go?" And then he'd show up with the Tom Anderson, and then he'd throw that away, and then or trade it in, and then he'd show up with a Mesa Boogie and stuff. So that was, I'm sure that partly fed the disease, and that along with my wall that I had cut out from all the guitar magazines of George Lynch sitting in a room with 50 guitars and 27 heads, and him saying, like, for the rhythms, I use these heads, and leads, I use these heads, and for cleans, I use these heads, which, like, you don't need to do that. In a rock band, you really do the John Sykes approach. One guitar, one amp, maybe an amp and a half, and then you go in, and that is your sound. You don't use every amp in the world, but, Lukather, Landau, all those guys, I was a liner notes guy, like you were.
Yep.
And I'd wonder, like, why does this album sound awesome and this album that they did not sound awesome? How come this guitar solo on this album with this band sounds like he's the best ever? Thank you, Dan Huff, for sitting in on this solo. And then this guitar solo is like,
Yeah. Yep.
And you start to wonder why, because music was so emotional. So it really felt something. So when you're like, I want to feel this again on another song, and you don't, it's a bummer. It's a tangible bummer. And you're like, well, why? How do I find the ones that really make me feel something?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how that journey goes through. And then the number and the amount of money I spent buying albums to hear a moment of guitar from like Michael Thompson or something like that.
Yep.
Endless.
Yep.
But also, thankfully, it's like, okay, now like I was exposed to Boss Skaggs because I had to keep going backwards or something like that. And like, he's a great musician and super cool. It's funny, I have 2 kids, teenagers. They'll play me a song, they're like, this is amazing. I'm like, oh, awesome. Who is it? They have no idea. Like is it one guy in a studio, or is it a band? No idea.
Couldn't tell you.
It's just not that thing anymore, for whatever it is. So anyway, 80s come, stereo's awesome. Stereo guitar, I mean. 90s come, and it's like, okay, no more stereo guitar. I went to the Mesa Boogie store, and I told the guy, I was like, hey, man, I've got this Ibanez RG760 that I had put EMG pickups in, and it's my baby. And he was like, oh, you got to get rid of that, man. Because it was the 90s. It was like 95.
Oh, my gosh, man. I had an SL1.
Like, that's a dog.
I had a 1990 SL1 with the lightning graphic on it. I sold that guitar in 2003-ish, 2002, something like that. The neck had cracked. It was a fairly simple fix. But, I need cash. Out the door it goes. That thing, I must have saved up. I spent $900 on it in 1991 or something like that. I think maybe $800. That thing was going for like $4,000 on Reverb. And I was like,
jeez.
I had a bevy of rack gear that I sold for nothing in 1997 and 98. I mean, just nothing. And I wouldn't give to have some of it back.
I know.
So I get it. Well, like you said, it was the 90s. There was just so much that was like, this is out the door. Get yourself a pedal board, some fuzz, call her a day. Like it was a different time. And
yeah, I mean, it was. I was very influenced by the guitar magazines, like I'm sure a lot of people were, and I'm sure.
By the way, I love your videos where you go through them because it just takes me right back to Nostalgiaville. I'm like, oh yes, this is great.
I think they inceptioned us 30 years later to buy everything. Because without the guitar magazines, we would have not. We would have been like, cool, I'll just go get this amp, whatever amp the store has,
Absolutely.
and I'll go make music.
Absolutely.
But the magazines programmed all these new players to say like, that's what you need is the next cool thing. And what this sounds like, it's warm and bright and clear and dark. And you're just like, there was a point where it didn't matter what the gear was. It had the same review all the time. It was every adjective.
That's so true. Or they would get you on stuff that, because, you can't hear it looking at the ad. But do you remember and this is getting later, this is more mid-90s, but you remember the Crate Blue Voodoo amp?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, they spent so much advertising on that. You would have thought this is the greatest head that you could ever have. I don't care what the cabinet is. Just set it on your coffee table and plug it in. This thing will create magic. And I plugged in into one of those things, and I thought, I must suck as a guitar player because this sounds like crap. And but it's true. The magazines was what a great way to put it. They did inception us. So this is your musical journey. From childhood moving on, how did it get to like, okay, now I am going to work in the music industry, and then you got to a YouTube channel? I mean, how did you go from A to B to C to D?
Like college.
You went to UCLA, right?
I went to UCLA.
Okay.
I had we had a couple cool musicians in this fraternity that I had joined, and so we like, let's jam at this party. And then I had a pretty good showing of people like, whoa, you could really play. You got to connect with this other guy. So and that wasn't at the party. So they connected me with this guy named Brian Tyler, and we hit it off instantly because I remember the exact words. He's like, we're like, what kind of music are you into? And he's like, well, I'm into like pop music, but not like, at the time, like not like Milli Vanilli or whatever. Like when I say pop music, I mean like Toto and like maybe Whiteheart or something like that. And I was like, whoa,
stop traffic.
Did we just become best friends?
Yes.
And we totally did. I mean, and he's a brilliant guy, and he ends up now he scores the films for like the last bunch of Fast and Furiouses, and
I love it.
He did the F1 theme. I mean, he's amazing. So honestly, he showed me like, if you want to be a musician, you have to decide to be a musician and go do it.
Yep.
So coming out of college, like we worked together for a while. I actually, because he was scoring the movie, and at the time he could play some guitar, but he did a movie called Six String Samurai. Have you ever seen that?
No, I don't think so.
It's a very weird martial arts movie that came out a couple decades ago. And at the end, the main character who plays this rockabilly sort of style guitar ends up having to have a guitar duel with Death, who is like the more metal guy. And I got to play the guitar for Death, which was like, I'm like, this is it. It's full circle to Crossroads. I'm so happy
that is awesome.
To be the guitar player for Death.
Oh, that's so cool.
I have to find a clip of that and post that. Yeah. Forgot about that. But so yeah, from there, strangely, I worked at Guitar Center for a while, and I met my current like production and company partner there, and like a ton of amazing people. I was in bands, and then was producing pop music, which was horrible. Because of the era.
Stop. It was horrible.
Horrible. And that was because I was like, I want to be a studio guitar player. How do I do that? And, I'd asked a couple people, and they're like, well, honestly, the best way is to write the song. And then you get to say who gets to play on the track or produce the song. It's like, all right, I'll produce the song.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, it's true, though. That's what I wanted to be. I was like, I don't really want to be on tour. I like being home too much. Yeah. But I'll tell you what, if you put me in a studio, that'd be just fine. I can just mess around with all the gear and record stuff. That's fine. Then apparently they went away. So it's like,
I thought I was ready.
I didn't have the chops.
Not ready.
Yeah, I couldn't do that.
Like, I was not a one-take person. I was, like I mentioned before, I could come up with great parts that really serve the song, but not in one take.
Yeah.
It just doesn't. That's not how I would do it. In fact, because we were working in this building with all these professionals and stuff. One of the guys downstairs who had been a big touring bass player, he came up. He's like, "I really love how you play guitar. I could hear you through the floor." And he's like, "I love how you work out the parts and how I hear them evolve over time and stuff." He's like, "I want you to audition for this big pop singer," and I did. And it was the worst audition probably they've ever heard, ever. Because first of all, they're like, just download the songs. Because this was LimeWire and BearShare era.
Oh, yeah.
Napster. They're like, okay, so it's the Wild West. It's like all this bullshit. I didn't have any money to go buy them on iTunes if that even existed at the time. I don't think it did, but I wasn't going to go to Tower Records and spend $50 that I didn't have.
Right.
So I downloaded the songs. Turns out I downloaded all the dance remixes accidentally. So I don't even know what her songs sounded like. Wrong tempo, keys are in the wrong place. Hot mess. The nail in my trying to be a professional guitar player coffin was we wrote 2 songs and produced songs for Eric Gales, amazing guitar player.
Yes.
And then I had produced an album with Philip Sayce, also amazing guitar player. And both of those were like, oh, that's what a gifted guitar player is.
Oh, yeah.
And I've used that word before where I feel like some people are gifted and some people are talented. Like, and I was talking to a friend and I think he took offense to it. He was like, he didn't feel like anyone was gifted. And he felt like I was taking something away from them by saying, like, this guy is gifted. I don't at all mean that they didn't put in any work, but it's a huge difference when you see Jason Becker at 17 years old.
Yep.
He's gifted, 100% gifted.
Yeah.
Steve Lukather has a story about when he was like 6, picking up a guitar. He saw the Beatles, he picked up the guitar, and he played 3 chords. No one showed him the chords, no lessons.
Yep.
He just picked it up. Now,
Dimebag Darrell went into his bedroom for a summer and came out, and he was like, I got this guitar thing down.
Totally gifted. Now, like, Lukather studied with 4 or 5 different jazz musicians, like, put in the work, of course.
Yep.
And that's why he's in the stratosphere of people. But I would dare say that you and I have put in the same number of hours.
Correct.
But there's no way I could dunk like Michael Jordan. I could practice every day.
I can't play like Lukather.
Yeah, just a little, we're very talented, but it's
not gifted.
Gifted in a different way. I always say, like, I'm gifted in a totally different way.
Speak for yourself. The gifts are out the door. It was all talent, I guess. Here.
And it is what it is. It's like there's people that are super talented that make it super far.
I love that way to put that. Actually, I may steal that from you. I think that's a really good.
Feel free.
Good way to put it.
So I realized, like, that is not where my gift lies.
Sure.
I had written a song. We had done some music with Selena Gomez very early in her career. And then we were working with some other big producers. And that producer's like, dude, he's like, I love this song. He's like, but everything you write kind of reminds me of Danger Zone. For Top Gun. I was like, yeah, I guess so.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, so it's like, and nothing of it actually sounded like Danger Zone, but there's an inherent, like, feeling of this sort of drama and epicness and stuff.
Yes.
And it's like, yeah. And I realized, like, pop music is not my thing. Like, I just don't care about the vocal enough. I care about the music. Yep. So I ended up, skip the long story, but transitioning into scoring. So I was scoring video games and films and stuff like that, which really was a better place for me. And then as a guitar player, it opened my, like, what I can do, because I knew how to make all these sounds and morph guitar into stuff, and I could fit guitar into these unusual situations with synths and orchestra and stuff in a different way than what I've heard a lot of people where they pull up their dual rectifier sound and they're like, cool, I'm going to do Evanescence with an orchestra. And it's like, that's fine. It's just not like, if a producer doesn't want guitar, they're going to hate that. So it's finding ways to hide it, but make it super cool. So I had been producing and composing a ton. And, I had a couple guitar stuff laying around, and I was just like, there's just no reason to play guitar. A lot of it would be like, bong, like, what a drag. So I decided, like, I need to, like, figure out something that's gonna force me to sit down and learn the whole solo, so to speak. And then I was on an airplane, getting on an airplane. I was in the little tube that takes you to the airplane on eBay. And I was like, I've never had an ADA MP1. I'm like, $125? I'm just going to buy it. And it showed up, and then that was it. That was the end.
So that was the first one. Okay, I'm glad you said this. That was the first one. You hadn't saved all these from like years. Okay, so this was like, I've always wanted one of these. I'm getting it. Here we go.
Yeah, all my amps had come and gone. Actually, the first good amp. No, I had a dual rectifier through the 80s, 90s, and that just kind of sat in the corner for ages. I honestly, I never knew how to dial it in right. So it was all my fault. It was like bass 10, mids 5, treble 3. It was a mess. So I had that for ages, but nothing to take away from the dual rectifier because it's a great classic amp. But my first like great amp was the Fryette Deliverance. Well, it was a VHT at the time. VHT Deliverance 120, and I knew the VHT logo, the brand from the 80s. Yep. I was like, yes, I'm totally in.
I want that.
And it is mind-blowingly great. And so I had a dual rectifier and that VHT for a long time, and I think that's all I had by the time I maybe had gotten into a diesel, but it was like no pedals. I still had a couple pedals from, my existence in life, but no rack gear to speak of, not for a guitar. I had the studio rack gear and that. But so that ADA MP1 was definitely the beginning. And then locally, I found a guy selling a Soldano X88R with matching purple VHT 2150 for $2,000 for the pair, I think it was.
Oh my gosh, what year was this?
I would say that was like 15 years ago.
Okay. Okay.
It wasn't hard to find rack gear, but it wasn't. I wouldn't say it was super cheap.
No, you were kind of in that bubble up moment of like you could pick and choose some spots. Because I tried to do the same thing about 12-ish years ago, where I tried to grab some things that I'd always wanted or I sold, and I was like, some of this is really undervalued, and some of it I wouldn't call it cheap, but it's not today by any means type thing.
Like when I got my Bogner Fish, I bought it for $2,000. So that was, now I've seen them for like 3, 4, 5, but 2,000 was a lot, and it came in from Hawaii. But it had been ages since I had even seen one. Let's see what else came in, but like I bought a Mesa Boogie Studio preamp for like $500. You could get a ton of stuff for $500. Groove Tubes Trio for $500. And then what happened is like there was a point where I had so much stuff, and I've never had a lot of space, even at the last studio I was in. It was just too much, which is why I ended up doing like a lot of the Kemper stuff, because like I just can't keep everything as much as I would love to. And then this guy came along that was really great, named Michael Torin. I don't know if you know of Michael.
I do. I've watched all his stuff. I think it's phenomenal.
He had reached out to me to see if I was interested in selling my Bogner Fish. And so, we became friends, and it's great because like I don't want to sell my Groove Tube Trio, but I also don't want a 2U rack space thing just sitting in my rack for 4 years, like never turning on. So like some of the stuff is like, here, you can have it. Some of the stuff is like, I'll sell it to you bone cheap. Like, here, $400. Like, whatever. And it's like putting it in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And you're like, I know where it is. And he's so generous with me. He's like, take whatever you want. Like, I gave him my Steve Vai guitar cab that was from Steve Vai's touring era because I just don't have, like, he's doing me a huge favor by saving it. And then there's no better place. Like, it's really cool. So, I mean, but his collection is bonkers. He's got everything now. I mean, outside of like a Dumble preamp.
I couldn't believe first time I ever saw videos, or photos, because everyone kept bringing up, they're like, well, if you're into rat gear, you need to look up Michael Torrin. So I did. And I was just like, oh, yeah, that's so a collection. Like, it's just, it goes for, what it reminded me of was, I don't know if you follow Frankie Sullivan from Survivor on any of the socials, but one day he went into he has like a warehouse or some sort of storage unit. And on his Instagram, he would put up a reel and he's like, yeah, so this was a Bradshaw rack and this was this. I guess I have two of them. Probably should get rid of one of them. I mean, he's just walking through this whole thing and I'm just going, oh my God. And so anyway, one day I just posted, he's like, maybe I'll give one of these away one day. And of course I posted the raise hand emoji. Like, whenever you're ready, I'm in Omaha, Nebraska. It's 189, and
I'll drive to you.
Exactly. But it's just so cool to just see, the collection, whether it's Torrens or the stuff that you've had in the past and showed, and whether you've kept it or, been using it for a video. It's, I think, the nostalgia factor for me, it just takes me so far back to things that I didn't have. Going back to the whole Guitar Magazine Inception thing, there were so many things. I think the biggest thing, too, not to get off, I do want to keep going on the journey to your YouTube channel, but you got me thinking about this. And then I brought this up with Rich and some other people and John McCurry when I was talking about his How Can We Be Lovers solo. I said, that was the first, here's a Michael Bolton song, but I said, that was the first where as a kid, you and I, you hearing that guitar for the first time strum through. As a kid, I had PV amps, in the late 80s, PV practice amps was what I was doing. And it had a gain thing, and I remember hearing a Dan Huff or a John McCurry solo and that symphonic, I didn't know what the hell chorus was or, pitch shifting or understanding the symphonic sound that was coming out of the guitar. But I remember I plugged into my practice amp and I go, it doesn't sound like that. And I didn't know what these rack effects were. So there was a long period of time where I was just searching for that sound, but I didn't have the internet to tell me how to get it. So I went through hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of pedals and amps over the years that only just got marched right back out the door because it didn't give me that sound. And I felt like it was until to be on an affordable level for somebody in their, suburban home to have somewhere close was the modeling era to finally get where I don't have to create a room to stack up the old rat gear.
Yeah.
But I also can get that high fidelity type sound. That is,
I agree. I think it was Line 6. They're the guys. The first time I was able to do that, it was the Line 6 Amp Farm plugin or the pod.
Yep.
And and it was ages before you could get to a micro pitch shift.
Oh my gosh.
And
I remember
the Eventide boxes never came down in price. They were always fairly expensive. They never went really under $1,000.
Yeah.
If you could find a working one. When I was in a senior year of high school, we played a Battle of the Bands, and I rented a rack from a guitar teacher that had a Soldano, X88 preamp, Rivera power amp, TC 2290. It was the full. He was the guy that introduced me to Dan Huff. He's like, oh, check out this band, and I was like, again, head exploded. But I played Battle of the Bands with a huge rack. It was awesome. So that was the bug.
That is amazing. I love it. But you were like, I'm not giving this back.
Oh yeah, I know. I remember too. He was kind of funny about it. I don't know why. It was like someone in his school was like the photographer, the kid. You know, he goes to take a picture of it, and the guy was like, poof, knocks him out of the way, like no pictures. Like, what are you doing?
Why?
It's like a little high school.
Why is it so secret? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. We were talking about going towards YouTube, but now you're starting to collect all this stuff.
Yeah,
you've had this relationship with Michael Torin. When was the idea to like, okay, now I'm going to film myself for the masses type deal?
So that stuff was really, I mean, my relationship with Michael Torin was only like the last 2 or 3 years. But we have a saying together was like, I must hear it. And that is like, that's sort of his mantra and his self-excuse to buy something of like, well, I must hear it.
I must hear it to know.
So, I mean, at the end of the day, that's what it would be nice to die going, I have heard everything. Which is the inception that was planted from guitar magazines in the 80s. I just need to hear it and confirm, like, is this the greatest thing ever, or is it exactly the same as the thing next to it?
Right.
So, through my production career, I've always, I'm not gifted really on anything. On this. It's a lot of like tiny little gifts that have merged together in something that kind of works for this whatever lane that I picked or found me, whatever it was. So everything was really hard. I never just showed up and listened and be like, give me the faders, I'll mix this for you. Or like, I know how the sound should be. There's people that are like, yeah, knob, done. Everything was learned through super hard work, and the only way to learn it is to compare. I never had like mentors and stuff like where you could go into a mastering studio with a legendary mentor and be like, this is what you're listening for. So, but if you compare quick A/B, you'll know like something went away. What went away? Or something was added on this one, and you could go like, well, I like this one better for better or worse. I like this one better, and you start to piece together sort of a sonic vocabulary in your head. So whether it was pedals, compressors, mic preamps, guitar preamps, amps, whatever it was, I was always doing that. And the best way to do it is, I was just doing it last week. Yeah, you record yourself, go to the other one, try and record the same thing. Great. Listen back, make sure you label them, because you always think, I'll remember. And then, like, 15 minutes later, you're like, I don't know what that was.
Oh, man.
This is the sound, and I have no idea what it is. Yeah, that's a true Michael Nielsen move right there. That Zach Wilde video, I get every comment. What were the settings? I don't know. I didn't write anything down. I thought for sure I would remember.
Couldn't tell you.
No idea. Yeah, so it's lost to history twice. So once you have that recorded, then you go listen back someplace else. Go listen in your car, go listen in the bathroom on your earbuds or whatever. And then you go, oh, actually, it didn't really matter. The difference between these two doesn't really matter, or it matters a lot. And if you can kind of play them in a mix, even if it's just like AC/DC, couple riffs on a simplest drum beat, you'll hear like, oh, okay, this is why a Friedman is different than a Marshall, even though they're so related. Like if you watch, I think my very first video was like 20 different rack delays. And, like Lexicon PCMs, TC2290, maybe some plugins, delay pedals and all this stuff. Like, because it doesn't matter if it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. If you use a Boss DD6 and it sounds awesome, great. I am not a snob when it comes to that stuff. But if it does matter, then it matters. And that's where I get annoyed on something, not where I'm losing sleep over it, but there's some sounds or like a modeler where you go like, yeah, that's the sound, it's just not the sound. Like,
yep.
And so it kind of matters. Like,
You bring up such a good point. And I feel like watching your videos and really, and this is nothing against any of the other modelers, because I got incredible sounds out of the Helix, and I got incredible sounds out of, I had a buddy with a Kemper, and I've tried this and that. But and this is not let's kiss Michael Nielsen's ass here, but like the THU-Overloud stuff. Now, if I could take it with me, on a stage without a laptop, it'd be different. But if I'm just sitting here recording, between that and the Fractal, after playing the guitar for 34 years, I'm not kidding when I said I just got rid of everything at a certain point. I said, none of this is being used. None of these are being used anymore for what I need to do at this age. Like, I don't need, and there were so many times in my life that I'd get something and I'd be like, that was really expensive and it's not it. Or I'd get something and go, this is less expensive and it sounds just as good as this. I'll never forget.
Because I'm seeing like, maybe there's, in film, there's 5 stories. They say there's only 5 stories.
Yeah.
I think maybe there's 5 guitar players too. I think we're the same guitar player. So let me see if this works. Have you ever sat and you obsess over this piece of gear for 2 weeks?
Yep.
In your head, you have determined this is the exact sound it is going to be.
Yes.
You spend a bunch of money on it. You get it into your hands, and within 3 seconds, you're like, this is not at all the exact sound I thought it was going to be. And I would never in a million years have purchased this at a store had I been able to just go, look, nope, that's not it.
Correct. And you know what? You know what's so funny you said this is? I just brought this up to somebody the other day talking about, local music shops. Are they going away? Are they different? I go, here's the deal. If Michael Nielsen or me or anybody records something and puts it on YouTube, it's still going to sound, we all have different hearing. We all have different studio monitors. We have different amps. We have different rooms. We have different playing styles. We have different pick attack. We have different this and that and the other. If I walk into a store and I play it, like the obsession goes away because I can right then and there. That was like back in the day. I remember I obsessed over some of those late 80s Boss pedals, because especially like those original ones that were built like tanks. You know what I mean? I remember hearing somebody play through that on stage because I saw it and I was like, oh my God, this is if I could just run this through my PV practice amp, all my dreams would come true. And I plugged it into Brooke Mays Music in Dallas, Texas, where I grew up. And I plugged that thing in and I was like, this sounds like garbage. And I never bought it. Now, to this day, it's one of the only pedals I kept because I found out how to set it correctly. But at that moment, there's so much stuff on YouTube. I was going through a magazine not a magazine, but reading an online or a marketing email about here's all the new gear that came out this week. And I was thinking to myself, if I see another gear review for another, blank that supposedly does this, I might puke because I feel like I wasted so much money doing exactly what you just said. I obsessed over it for 2 weeks and I got it and I was disappointed and I sold it for less than I bought it for. So I'm just constantly taking this loss when it was like, what am I searching for? Like where? So I feel like between the two things I mentioned, it was finally like, oh crap, there it is. There it is. There it is. Without me having Dan Huff's rack, this is right underneath there for that sound. Or without me having that exactly and in that studio on that board, this is it. But yes, if I could go back in time and change one thing in my guitar journey is not to buy everything I bought merely to test it out. There were more times than not I already had the tone. I just didn't set it correctly. Or
I've had the great luck and pleasure and dumped so much money into trying so much stuff. And I've been able to justify a lot of it because at some points it was right off, and some points it's like, well, it's my job. So I got it. Like the Bricacity reverb, like it's bonkers expensive, but like I could justify it and go like, it's my job. So whatever. If that's what I feel it's important to make money, it's important. But after you hear, like when you hear it and you really absorb what the DNA is of some of these things, then you're able to reproduce it on other things that aren't as exclusive. And that's where I feel like I couldn't just show up and make like the Overloud THU patches. Like I'm only able to do that because I'm at this point in my journey and I've heard every rack chorus and I've tried to match this rack chorus with this rack chorus and I've tried every delay and I know sort of what matters on all of these, even the reverb. So I could take kind of a meh reverb and I can make it kind of do the thing that I want it to do. And then at some point, the sum of all the parts works, even if you isolate down, like, well, that's maybe not the best reverb. But if I mix two of those with the delay and it's working in the background and this other stuff, then it's like, well, that really works.
Right.
But it's only because I've tried everything. And, you know, in this journey on my YouTube channel, too, we've all heard that thing of like, well, it's in the hands and you sound like what you sound like. And it really hit me just in the last year. Like, I sound exactly as I go back and watch some of the videos that I did. I'm like, I sound the same on this amp as I do on this other amp. They're completely different amps.
Yep.
Partly because I'm dialing it in the way I like it, and partly just because like I play how I play. But that sort of, when you hit that point, gear becomes a little less precious. And
I tried to explain this. Somebody the other day asked me about what patch I used, and a lot of times I put it on my replies. I'm like, go look at Big Hairy Profiles, go to Overloud. You can find the rig. It's right. You know, it was the Soldano. It was the Ace. It was whatever it was, right? And I said, and I just tweak it for my studio monitors. Or if I want to do the super cabinet, I will do that to get a certain effect or whatever for the deal. But I had the same epiphany the other day watching one of the very first videos I did was the Angelia solo. Landau solo on Richard Marx's song. Right. And I was playing on a modded Jackson that because I have fun modding and refinishing guitars. It's one of my favorite things. And that guitar is completely different and less expensive than the one I built that I replayed it during the Angelia playthrough video where I kind of did the rhythm part and then I did the solo part and then I did some of his, other riffs. And what's funny is I listened back to them both. They're both running through Overloud. I sound the same way on two different guitars, two vastly different guitars on two vastly different wiring setups. And the pick attack and everything else, the way I played it is identical. I did Landau's Aladdin solo twice because I didn't like the first recording. Sounded exactly the same as the first time.
No, but this I have not gotten over yet. You cannot just go pick up like a Jackson Flying V and play like a Toto song. It's like flat on the play. You need to have some sort of 80s-ish era super strat.
Correct.
At least it needs to look like it. That's all I care about at that point. Like, if I'm going to play Anthrax, I'm grabbing that Jackson. You can't take the super strat and go play Anthrax.
No.
Or Eric Johnson.
No.
Even if it's...
I'm so glad you feel that way, because it's just as important to me as what guitar I'm playing.
So important.
Like, so for instance, on the Wilson Phillips song, notice I had a red Strat. There was no like switches like an F16 on that thing. That was a basic red 3 single coil Strat. That's what she was. And it was important for me that was on the video.
And that is still important.
I'm glad I'm not alone in that. I don't have a problem.
Because if you're going to play another song, if you're going to play like a Nuno song or something, you might have to buy a guitar for that. I'm just saying.
You might have to.
You might have to.
You might have to. Why are you buying another guitar? Because I have to play this solo. Yeah. It's period correct.
I'll play that song once or twice, put the guitar in the closet again, and then
that's right.
My eyes will set on a new guitar.
I think this is just interesting off the topic of music, but just doing a YouTube channel, I find it interesting because, again, I'm not making any... This is not my job. This is a passion project for me. I love it. But what have you found? Because I think I love watching people build things, whether it's building a following or building a brand or building a company. I think it's fascinating, and I love hearing about it. What was it like, your journey on YouTube? Was it like, oh, this will be something for fun, and then it started growing? Was it quick? Was it fast? Was it slow? Was it one of those things where you were surprised by anything in the beginning?
No, I think it's been super slow, I would say, even. You know, I'm lucky I'm in town with Dave Friedman. Dave was working on my rigs here and there and doing repairs. And I'd be at the shop and I was like, what's that over there? Like, if I could, I'm going to take it home to see if I'm going to buy it, but I'll shoot a video for it. And at the time he's like, well, okay, it's fine. You know, what harm can it do? So what I was basically doing in the beginning is all of the things that I was doing them for myself. So like the delays, all the delays, I would make that for myself anyway. And it was easier I still go back and reference it sometimes. I'm like, really, what is the difference between like the Roland SDE 3000 and the PCM 42? Like, I could go do that and just go back and listen to it. And I thought, you know, someone else might be interested in seeing that. And then it got to the point where I was like, oh, there's a couple people interested in this. Let me put in some real effort. My skills as a videographer are terrible. So, I mean, so much of my videos early on are so blurry. Like, the back speaker is in hyper focus, but I'm super blurry.
Listen, I'm just going to say this right now. You have one of the best lit videos every time in the game. So I don't want to hear that you're bad.
I
don't want to hear that you're bad. I tell people all the time, I'm like, look, if I could light stuff like Michael Nielsen could light it, everything would be much better. It looks outstanding.
Thank you. It took like 8 years of terribleness. And there was one Friedman started making pickups, and they sent their guy over to my studio. I'm like, look, man, studio looks horrible. Everything comes out yellow. I spend hours trying to color grade, and that's why I would, in my earlier videos, there's lots of like smoke and mirrors of like graphics and pop-ups, because I'm like, don't look how shitty this looks.
If I throw more graphics in, they won't look at the color.
Totally,
yeah, I get it.
The graphic is in focus. But the guy came in and brought a huge light, humongous umbrella light, and it looked amazing. Yep. I was like, oh, damn it. That's what it was the whole time. Not thousands of dollars of trying different cameras and all that.
No.
Yeah. But
it was slow.
Super slow.
Yeah.
And the only real big bump, I mean, I've had, like I said, really nice that Friedman embraced me, and we really see it eye to eye. And a lot of times, like, we just sonically see eye to eye. And he's helped me a lot. Dave has helped me a ton in dialing in sort of what I would call like my a cappella guitar tone, which is like, here's guitar sound. Because I never did that. It was not important. It was only like, how can this fit in a mix? And so that's how I was doing it. And he's like, it's kind of bright, and like, which that's how it fit in the mix. So it's quite nice to have Dave Friedman help you kind of like, what do you think of this? It's like, oh, how about more of this? How about more of this? Or how about less of this?
Yeah.
So that, I mean, that was pretty priceless there to help me hone in sort of that what that sound is. But it worked because we both sort of had the same end goal where we aim for. Typically, we really are in line, and on effects too. Like he'll mention something and I'll be like, I don't think that was that good, and he goes, yeah, that one sucked. Or he'll recommend something and I go, yep, you were right. That's the one. That's amazing. So like. That he's been great. I get pretty good numbers when I do like Friedman videos. Phil McKnight has been amazingly generous and kind of mentioning me on his show several times. And like there was one time I was looking at my subscription numbers. It was like 2,000, and all of a sudden it was like 5,000, 6,000, 7. I was like, what's happening? And it's just started. I thought it was a prank. It was like, Phil sent me. And I was like, I don't know who Phil is. I don't know what this is.
Oh my goodness.
But I just, I had watched his video. He did this amazing video of brands where he's like, this brand is owned by this brand. Brand is owned by this brand. It was like one of his first videos on a whiteboard. And it's incredible to see like, oh shit, everything is owned by like 3 companies and
right.
Yeah. Anyhow, so he's been really kind, and that's really the only bump. And everything after has been, no matter what I do, it's a really slow burn. And YouTube is just a vicious bitch. Really, like, whether you get the little feedback from them, like, this video isn't doing as well as your other videos.
Oh, I love that. My favorite is the one that says 5 less views at this point than other ones, and I'm like, it's been up for 6 minutes. Like, why are we already tracking that? I don't. Yeah, give it a minute. Like, we'll see.
It's so mean. It just is like heartless and mean. In all honesty, like, I've quit 5 times. I'm like, that's it. I'm done.
I love that you said quit. I'm done. No, I'm back.
Because like it's I don't make I make, I think on average like $300 a month from the ad rev streams or whatever that is. Which is that covers maybe my coffee for the studio. Right. Other than that, like, when it's going well, it's fun, and when it's fun, it's stuff I'm doing for myself.
Yes.
And it's hard to say no sometimes to a company that's like, do you want to try the cake? Brand new cake.
Yes. I do want to try the cake. Yes.
Yeah, I'm like, I know I just quit last week, but I do want that cake. So like,
hey, I get it. And my big dream is, and I've thought about this a lot, and it's funny, this is probably going to go out on YouTube, and I'm not trying to go against YouTube because, it's a platform and I think it's great. What I do like about YouTube is the fact that it's a searchable library. Like, I'm a library fan in general. I miss the libraries. Mm-hmm. I like the fact that videos live on. It's not a what have you done for me lately?
That's why
we're going to shove it.
I will not do TikTok and the stories, Instagram stories, because like, I'm not going to do it for it to disappear. Like, that's
it really. The only reason I do it on Instagram is really just because guitar brands are there, and there's other people like the younger guys, RJ and stuff, and and I follow them, and I notice some of the other artists are there versus on YouTube, so I can tag them when I do a solo. Yeah. I can find Steve Lukather official and Christopher Cross, like the one I did last night. I didn't know his handle was It's Mr. Cross, but now I know, and so there it is.
And it's tell you my Christopher Cross story.
Oh, I want to hear it and that's a whole nother story. Is that solo to All Right is one of the more ones you look down, you're like, well, that's simple, and then you're sitting there playing that little run that Lukather does, and I'm like, I can't play it as clean as he does. This is stupid. But anyway, I like YouTube for that. My big dream is, whether it is the cake, whether it is the people picking up an instrument, my common term is just keep playing. It's like, you're going to get better if you keep playing. At bare minimum, if you just play every day, you will improve. It may be a little, it may be a lot, but you will. Yeah. For me, there is so much that you do, that Leon Todd does, that RJ does, that just James Tyler Guitars with what they've done socially, talking about, Sean Tynan going through Series Parallel. Rich was telling me that was coming out, and I kept waiting on it. I'm like, that's a really cool thing, because I don't think kids have a clue what that is. Yeah. And
Rich taught me about that.
Yeah. Jim is such an innovator, and I don't think he gets enough credit, because he was working on guitars in an era that there was no internet. Yeah. You're not going to get clout for doing this. I mean, Jim was back there just making stuff happen and figuring it out with Seymour Duncan and a industrial park in California. I mean, it's just...
And a lot of the ideas products that came out that were pretty revolutionary were reportedly Jim's idea. Or at least a spark. Because, I mean, he was in the trenches with the players.
I told Rich, as somebody who builds guitars, I feel a lot better, because one of my favorite quotes is, you have to make bad barbecue to make good barbecue. And I love that quote.
Yeah, that's good.
But I love that, like, as many times as I've screwed up guitars, I learned something from it. Mm-hmm. Like, I put the shelf too low on that for the Floyd. Like, I probably should know that. How do I shim it? Well, if you shim it, it looks bad. Well, if you do it this way, it's probably going to go down. But like Jim figuring out, like if I drill down through the bridge of a Strat bridge, then the string won't get caught, and therefore it'll stay in tune better versus the ball end just sticking right at the top. So he figured that part out. Or talking to Seymour about stacking two single coils on top of each other and it becoming a noise canceling. But this is all for me to say that as much as I'm hearing the kids, I have more kids, and when I say kids, I mean kids, teenagers, 20s, people about to be 30, coming to me going, I had no idea this existed, and I play, and they're in Italy, and they're in Germany, and Netherlands, and, Indiana, and Canada, and Japan, and it's like there is a massive amount of people that they may have picked up a guitar during the pandemic, but they're still playing it. And there's like this army of guitar players coming. And I feel like it's pretty beyond. I love that you said I would do it anyway, because I feel the same way. I always wanted to tab all this out and just do it. And it takes hours, and it's not something that a lot of people think is a lot of fun for them. But I love having it out there that somebody can grab it, steal it, play it, and go, oh, and it's right. Remember the old days, Dude. If it wasn't in a magazine and you'd get the tab and it was wrong, and it was like, oh, I just learned that and it's wrong. Like, now I have to unlearn the wrong way. So I don't know. That is a long-winded way, sappy way of saying, oh, we're putting something back into the world that's valuable. But I really do think we are, because I think somebody picking up that visceral thing of having an instrument in your hands versus pressing a button, and watching the computer make music, I think is pretty damn cool, and I think you're a massive part of that.
Thank you so much.
That's what I was saying.
I appreciate that. That helps keep going. Comments are mean. The YouTube algorithm is mean. Some of the manufacturers of products are mean. Not they're mean. They're stressed. You're like, it's not my fault your product didn't sell.
Would you push it more? I think if you did one more video on this, no.
God, man, that's the stuff that really makes me want to quit. Of just like, forget it, dude. And I've really tried to push back on. I've had to say no to a lot of manufacturers, because there's some that have been super great. Like IK Multimedia, they're huge. I don't think people understand how big they are. They are mega millions of dollars a year company. So if my video for their like little interface, which is they make good products, if that does fine or not fine, they're like, it's all good, man. It's totally cool, which is how it should be. But if a small pedal company sends me a pedal and like I don't charge him anything, and he's like, what? Like, my numbers aren't moving. Like, okay. Like, that was not my fault.
Right. What do you want me to do?
Why did you decide to make a $400 clone? Like, I could go get one for $50.
It's the 87,000th transparent overdrive. I'd like you to promote it. It's transparent and overdrive. It's transparently overdrive.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because what I think some of the manufacturers are missing is like, I don't know why they don't do this. Go ask some people before you finalize your prototype. Whether it's software, at least that could get updated. But the number of things that people have asked, like, how about this? I'm like, well, why do you do that? Why would you put the volume knob that you use all the time way in the back in a tiny little tweezer thing? Like, that should you could have made a one knob volume on the front and we would have been done. Or like, why don't make this pedal at all? Bad idea.
I talk to guitar players all the time, and a lot of times they're like, I tried this, that, and the other that everybody's raving about. It's not what I'm really looking for is blank. And it's like, oh, well, they made one of those like 10 years ago. Let me show you. Like, I know where that's at if you want that sound. It's that. It's like you're not listening to going out and just asking a bunch of guitar players, like, what are you looking for? Are you looking for a deluxe reverb sound? That's the clean you want? You want a 1965 deluxe. You don't want anything else. There's nothing else I can give you. That's what okay, let's give them that. Like, kind of like the millions of dollars I feel like I've spent on pedals looking for one sound that came in a piece of software and a fractal that's sitting over here. Like, wish that had been a straighter line to that is all I'm saying.
Okay, so I'm going to circle back may sound like backtracking on my previous comment, but there's a reason that the Bogner fish, I think, is so sought after. And it's not because of the sound, because most people have no idea what it sounds like. I didn't before I got it. Like, people associate it with Alice in Chains, but, like, he didn't use Bogner fish on the big albums. He used some other Marshall, modified Marshall and stuff. So, like, I think there's some cuts with it. I know Metallica had it around. Like, everyone's had it around in the studio. But with all this gear, a lot of the gear is like, I'm getting it because it looks awesome. And I think 90% of the pedals, like, I look at my pedal board and I'm so bummed. I just put it together. There's just everything is really white. And I was looking the other day and like, how can I replace this white pedal with something that looks awesome?
Yeah,
because
it's true.
Like, I really, at this point, like you said, a lot of stuff sounds the same. So that's one thing. But it's got to be super functional. I don't want to have to crack a manual. And I want to be able to just dive in. I want it to sound awesome right away. That's a total given. That's something they need to talk to the players about before they make it. But it really needs to look awesome. Everyone's going to have a different definition for that. So, I mean, I think that's kind of where we're at now, where it's like someone just Googles, what is the top-selling pedal? And you're like, oh, it's a Tube Screamer or a Klon or whatever. And they're like, we're going to make that again. And, you know, it's like...
I guess you're right, because that baffles me. I'll sit there and look all the time, and I'm like, oh, we're making another one of these? Okay.
Yeah. Like, I think they just hope for the best. They're like, it's a top-selling pedal. There's too many. There's too much numbers feedback in data, in my opinion. Like, data has...
Correct.
Yes, I know some people will go like, data is everything. Yes, and you could scientifically data everything out there, but it's really pulls the fun out of stuff.
Well, I always say this, data is important, but there is not anything about our life that is cut, dry, black, white, however metaphor you want to use. There is nothing that way. Like, we all have gray. We have days that feel different than Monday. Like, there's not a data point that says every day John plays this on session solos because it works, and that equals this amount of subscribers, and this many more people find out and start playing the... It just doesn't exist. We're human beings. Like, there's too much gray in this world for data to be the end-all, be-all. I think it's a component.
But even music, like YouTube, it's just... I think about how much cooler YouTube would be if it didn't tell us how many subscribers anyone had, and it didn't tell us how many views anything had.
Yep.
That would be amazing.
Just let it live. Yep.
And even if their algorithm knew, so it knows to send you to, you know, okay, I'm going to get a Rick Beato suggestion every time. You're like, that's fine. This guy again, this guy again. That's totally fine. Their algorithm knows. But it would be incredible for a guy with 2,000 subscribers or 500 subscribers to put out a video and it show up in my feed and not to have the instant feedback of going, what does this guy know? He only has 500 subscribers and no one's watched this. So I go, correct. That's not good. There's a huge bias before you even go in. And then on the flip side, you're like, you're going into someone that has a, 500,000 views, and then you watch, you're like, this person can't even play guitar. Like,
right?
Where is this coming from?
How did they get all? Yeah, but yet you're right. We have the same intrinsic bias before we even watch the video, based on how big are they?
Yeah. Like, they must know something.
When it really doesn't. Technically, you're probably going to find that most amazing guitar players, there's a lot of them, not on YouTube. So if they did start a YouTube channel, they're probably pretty small. Like,
yeah, it was hilarious when Bukovac started his channel. It felt so great. I'm like, I have more subscribers than Bukovac. Awesome. Meanwhile, she's like,
well, when George Lynch got on Patreon, I was like, is this happening? And then George Lynch is on Patreon, and then he has a guy tabbing up all his solos.
Oh, wow.
And he checks them.
Whoa.
And I'm sitting there going, I'm not going to do any George Lynch stuff because I don't want to tab up something that George is trying to put out there. I mean, it's like, I'll just skip them. But I'm going, this is like my childhood dream. You're telling me that the tooth and nail solo and the rhythm part and everything is just right there. You just tabbed it out, and all I had to pay you is X dollars a month, and I get... Sounds good to me. Like, but again, I don't think George Lynch he would be somebody that if he showed up on YouTube tomorrow, yes, I know people would look him up and he'd have subscribers, but like he could start out at like 1,200 and be like somebody who's 29 years old is like, well, what does this guy know about guitar? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we got to go here before I let you go. I wanted to get some lists, and that is, I think people want to know, because I didn't ask this to Andrew Raharjo after all the rack gear that he's fixed. But what are your top 5 pieces of rack gear? Like if somebody said, you're going to have to pry these for my cold dead hands before I let go, is it like an 80A MP1? Is it a 2290? Like what is...
By the way,
on Michael Nielsen's list,
repaired my TC 1210 rack chorus. It's been dying since the day I got it, and I've been trying to find someone to fix it for 10 years. And like that's the coolest part of like YouTube, where it's like, you know, he's the perfect person to have gotten that Dan Huff rack. No one else would have shared all of the information, and no one else could have rebuilt it in the same way that he did. Yeah. Like that, that was such a gift. Really awesome. So let me see. Rack gear. Okay, so I think I would have to say the number one piece of rack gear would be a Lexicon PCM 70 over everything. Because one is it does sound-wise, it's not a preamp, it's an effect unit. It does everything. It has a gorgeous chorus in it, but it's usually too expensive to use as a digital chorus. The delays sound fantastic in it. You know, it has such a legacy of Lukather using the pan delays and the circular delays and stuff. The reverbs are fantastic, and it's one of those things, and that I never know if it's because I grew up hearing it or if it legitimately is the sweet spot of hi-fi and lo-fi. But it is big left and right, larger than life, beautiful, beautiful sounds, but still realistic sounding, like absolutely lovely. And, you know, you can still get them for like $1,000, so that's kind of nice. So I have 2 of those, but I really only have one set up. So that's fantastic. I'm going to take a quick aside and say, like, the Eventide H3000, I would say, because that's great. But there's a lot of entry points to what that does now. There's a lot of plugins. The Eventide H3000 factory plugin does almost all of the presets. They did a 1-to-1 preset on tons of stuff in there, and it sounds really good.
I love Eventide so much. I really
and then they broke out each algorithm. You could get an H9, you could get an H90. So I'm going to put that off the list because I can't recommend someone drop $1,500, $2,000 on a H3000 when you could go get an H9 and use it for the micro pitch shift, you know, and it's this big rather than back that big. The TC Electronic 1210 is my favorite rack chorus. I love the Dimension D. I love the tri-stereo chorus. But the TC is the least... It's the least chorusy, swirly of them all, while still adding this sort of like, woo, everything got huge and
okay, you and I are on the same page, so we have the same preference when it comes to that era. Because I always say with some people, they're like, oh, I want that Landau chorus thing. It's like, technically, it's not swirly. As much as is that big shifted sound that makes it big, but it doesn't sound like a flanger is going, you know, in the background.
Yeah, it's kind of like the ultimate is the Angelia clean sound, which is unbelievable.
Oh yes.
So like those are the effects, and I would say on the preamp side of the rack gear, I have to give it to the X88R because it's just like so iconic. I really have a thing for the Soldano sound. Like that's a really goes to my happy place. For whatever reason. Same. I don't always find it the most useful, like when I'm working, because it has a sound that I call it like, look at me. It's just something about
I'm not in the background with my Soldano.
Yeah, it's like, it's really like it wants to be in the front of the room.
Yep.
But
Yes.
yeah, it makes me super, super happy.
Those.
Yeah, and then power amps, like, I think the best power amp you could get in a reasonable thing these days is getting the Fryette Power Station. It's just so useful. You could...
I love the Fryette Power
So
Station.
good.
I had 3 of them rolling at one time. They're just great.
Yeah, and you could run it into itself, and you don't even have to use it as a loud output device. It's just a sonic power amp fattenerizer. I mean, you could use it as a power amp. It's just super. I just wish he would make it in an actual rack and not have the...
Wouldn't it be nice? Yeah.
I mean,
Put
he
it
has
in the-
rack ears, which I just find it's a little unsightly, in my opinion on that. But yeah, that's those would be the ones. I mean, there's so much good stuff, but and then I would say, lastly, the classic Bradshaw foot switch. Anytime I see that, I just go,
cool?
ah.
Okay. So my last question is, of all the tones, guitar tones, when you started putting those together and said, okay, I was going to do this for myself anyway, but is there that one when you were a kid growing up, you heard it, and it's kind of that one, whether it's a guitar player, a riff they did, a solo they did, that you go back to your childhood and you're like, yep, that was it. That was kind of that peak. I was always chasing that. You know what I mean? There's always that tone, I feel like, going back to our childhood that we're chasing.
This would be a little later than what I would say like my childhood, but it's if I could hone in from my childhood and adulthood to where I go, this is exactly what perfection is. It's Steve Lukather solo. It's I'll Be Over You. The single.
Yes,
they're on
both
the roof.
solos, the middle one and the outro
Yes,
one. Yes.
they're on the roof, and I believe it's actually
gonna rain.
It's either a Soldano SLO 100 or maybe a Mesa like Mark II. I'm actually not even sure what it is, but it's that perfect balance of where EMG pickups, which get a bad rap, and the 80s,
They really do.
The original 80s EMGs sound better than the new ones, which I've saw in person recently, and I was like, oh, they do sound better. Anyway,
You're right.
it's that perfectly the way the old EMGs are like solid and compressed in the perfect way. That lead tone is perfectly like soaring where there's no holes in it, no gaps. You could just, it sounds like you could sustain forever. It has an immediate attack. It's got big bottom end like punch to it. And then effects wise, it's got everything. It clearly has reverb, chorus, delay, pitch shift, maybe 4 delays going, who knows? But nothing is way out front. It doesn't sound chorusy. It doesn't sound reverby. It's the perfect blend. Everything is supporting the way that solo sings, and it's amazing changes and amazing note choice on top of that. It's something I play all the time when I'm in my demos, and people are always like, "Geez, man, you really like that solo, huh?"
Hey, you like what you like. That was one of the early ones I did too. I still don't feel like I got the tone right because it is so perfect. But so I lied. I am going to ask you one more question. But and I'm going to do a video called The Endings. And that is, there were so many songs of that era. For instance, the song You Wouldn't Know Love that both Cher and Michael Bolton both did on their separate albums. Landau did both solos. So they both recorded it. I think Diane Warren wrote both of them, or wrote the song, and they both did it. Landau recorded 2 very different solos, even though it's the same song with the same kind of groove to it. But if you go to the end of the Michael Bolton song, as it's fading out, Landau's just wailing. And I'm going to actually draw the levels up to try to get it as even as possible to get as much of his guitar playing as I can. But I have located, just driving around in my car listening to old songs, there's like 9 or 10 songs where, I mean, Rosanna's the most famous one, but that stays up for a while, where they're fading out. I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. He's on a tear. Let him go. Like, where are you going? I almost want to cover some of the endings. So anyway, I wanted to throw that out there to you because I thought you'd appreciate, let's get the endings of some of these songs that we missed. But I think yesterday I hit 70 different songs I've tabbed out and covered
Wow.
so far. I just want to see if there's one. I want to get a Michael Nielsen request so I can say this was Michael Nielsen's request and I hadn't done it yet. Is there a solo or a riff? And I'll tell you if I've done it yet. That you feel like I've got to cover, or I can't call my channel session solos anymore. It's like, if you haven't covered that, and don't say Running with the Night, because I know I still got to get that one done. Like that's
well, if
that
it's
one in Rosanna, I've just avoided.
If it's an outro solo, I'll merge the two. So it's outro
Okay.
solo and awesome solo. Dan Huff, Innocent Days on Giant Last of the Runaways.
I just had a request for that, and I'm like, I got to get to that. I got to get to it. Okay. Yep.
And he has a couple beautiful lines in there and some quick stuff. It doesn't sound like it's impossible to do, but it's just, I mean, that man is the sweetness.
I just think it's cool the influence they had on all of us, and here we are talking about it on an interview in 2023.
Yeah, years later. It's like talking about Hendrix. It's like I used to look at some of these guys putting out books, and some of these old farts, they're so obsessed with Hendrix. And I'm like, what? Which chorus did Lukather have in his rack in 1986?
Michael, is that us? Are we the old guys now?
Welcome.
The water is warm. Yeah. Jump right in. Yeah. Man, I can't thank you enough. I feel like I talked to you for 3 more hours, man, about guitars. And
I'd love to do it again, sometime for sure.